Change Your POV podcast is about building confidence in your own beliefs, morals, and opinions while challenging yourself to be open, humble, and curious about things that you are unfamiliar with, don't have experience in, or straight up disagree with.
We will explore concepts and ideas that will challenge you physically, mentally, and spiritually. Personal introspection is among the greatest skill sets you will learn to hone. The foundation of your success is rooted in trust, gratitude, and forgiveness.
So join us as we explore things that we are unfamiliar with, strengthen things that we are, and are always challenging ourselves to become better.
Change Your POV podcast, where perspective is the vantage point of success.
This is another installation. I call it an installation because this is literally a building block onto itself. Last week we covered Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 of Extreme Ownership. This week we are talking about Chapters 3 and 4. 3 chapter titles, Bleve, and Chapter 4, Bennett, you're going to be covering is what?
Ego.
Ego. The actual title is Check the Ego. Love the title because anytime you talk about ego, the discussion can quickly turn very defensive.
Super defensive.
Which I think is the point of why we should talk about it. But so we're going to break this up. I'm going to cover Chapter 3, Bleve, and then for the first half of the show, and then Bennett's going to dip into and lead the discussion on checking the ego. So let's just jump right into this, brother. How are we digging this book so far?
I love this book.
I mean, we've both read it, but this is the first time on the show we've actually really discussed any of these concepts with each other at length, and I think it's interesting because this is the book that.
Well, yes and no. I mean, like ego, we've covered a lot because. You know, we at least prescribe to the fact that ego is the enemy.
Yep.
But beyond that, nothing.
Right. I think it's interesting taking these military-esque concepts and then converting them into like the principles in the practical application to business, right? Which is
right.
What I find really, really interesting. As a matter of fact, it's so interesting that I don't know if I said this yet, but I'm using this book as our I started a book club within my department at work, right? So Every week I've scheduled 30 minutes. Me and my team, we sit down, and I bought a hard copy of this book for each member of my team, including our summer intern. And so our entire team every week sits down, and the idea is you read the chapter beforehand, and I have a one-page document that I ask everybody to fill out, and asks us, some simple questions. What was the general overall overarching, concept of this chapter? What does this chapter mean to you? What can you take away from some aspect of this chapter in your life, your relationship, or at work? And then we go around the table, and each member of my team talks about the chapter and talks about each of those points. And then we have a good dialogue about it. And that's it. Real quick, 30 minutes, we're in and we're out. And every member of my team so far has said that this would not have been a book that they would have picked up by choice and have read on their own. But now that they're getting into it, they're really, really glad that we're doing this because they find a lot of value in it. Which is, this says a lot about who we are as people. We tend to stay very near to what we're comfortable with and what we know, and we're apprehensive to reach outside of our comfort zone and do things outside of our norm. And unfortunately, that's typically where you generally grow and learn, is outside of your comfort zone. So I guess the lesson there is, if you're recommended a book, or you see a book, or you hear about a book that is a good book and it's something that you may not have picked up on your own, give it a shot. You never know, right?
Absolutely.
All right, we'll get into it. Bleve. So here he is. Jocko is in Ramadi, Iraq, and he's. I'm going to read some of this, but I'm going to kind of get you caught up. Otherwise, I'd be reading the entire chapter to you, and that's not the intent here. So he's basically been instructed by his leadership that, and a directive came down to all SEAL team forces, SEAL teams that were operating in each of those different battle spaces in Iraq at the time, that in order for them to go outside the wire and conduct missions, that they would have to go outside the wire with Iraqi coalition forces. So here you are, you're a SEAL team, and you've been, unlike the regular military convention where there's a lot of movement. So you know, I do 2 or 3 years at a duty station, and then I rotate to a different duty station, and then there's people on my team that are constantly rotating in and rotating out. There's a lot of movement within the conventional military, but in the SEAL teams, I mean, they still move around and stuff, you know, because there still has to be experience and promotions and things like that, schools, trainings that they go to. But for the most part, when they're put together as a team, they stay together for, you know, a while. And they could be together in training for 3, 4, 5, or even more years. And so they get really, really comfortable with each other. They know, you know, like he describes in the book, that you could tell each member of your team in the dark by just their silhouette and the way that they carry themselves and the way they walk and how their gait, you know, the actual way somebody walks is called a gait.
Yeah.
So they can like see silhouettes of each other in the dark and just know who it is by how they walk. I mean, that's how...
It'd be like looking at your father or your brother or somebody that you are, you know, very familiar with, like looking at them from like a half mile away.
And yeah.
And like you just know it's them because of the way they walk. I think that's one of the examples. So
yeah, it is. And I've experienced that too, but with guys that I've worked with for a long time. I can look, you know, from one end of the motor pool to the other end of the motor pool, and of course everybody's wearing the same uniform, so it's not like you're able to tell people apart by what they're wearing. But you could quickly pick out who's who by just the way they carry themselves. And so that's how intimate these guys are with each other. And I use the word intimate very deliberately because it is a very intimate thing to get to work and to train. And I mean, you're with these guys a lot. Like, you know, yes, a lot of them are married and have families and kids, etc. But they're spending the bulk of their time eating, drinking, sleeping, showering, training. You know, and you've got to experience all of the emotions of life with these guys. You know, the good moments, the bad moments, the happy, the sad, etc.
Especially on deployment.
Yeah, especially on deployment, absolutely. So these guys are very, very close. Now, they've spent a lot of time training, a lot of time with each other. They trust each other. They know that they've got each other's backs. They're sixes, right? And now all of a sudden, right, they're dropped into Ramadi, arguably at the time the most dangerous hot spot in the country and probably the world at the time. And they're basically instructed that, oh, you want to get some? You want to go out on mission? Okay. You can, but you got to bring a contingent of Iraqi coalition forces with you. And that's you're like, wait a minute. These guys, number one, they didn't train with them. They didn't know them. They didn't trust them. And on top of that, they weren't physically fit. They didn't have the right equipment. They didn't have discipline. Most of them weren't motivated. And there was even reports where these guys had actually turned their weapons on U.S. coalition forces and engaged them, right? So, like, damn, son. Now, how do you go from operating as such a close-knit group unit to all of a sudden you got to invite, you know, the neighbors over to go out on mission with?
Yeah, but not even the neighbors, like the neighbors that you just don't.
It's the illegal alien neighbors that don't speak English.
Right, or, yeah, like, yeah, man. I mean, I can't think of a really good analogy off the top of my head, but holy shit.
Right?
I mean, just like ridiculous.
So
into one of the worst battle spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of neighbors, planet. It's not like you're inviting them over to barbecue, right? You're inviting, you got to take them out and basically put yourselves and these guys' lives at risk, like serious risk. So I'll read a little bit out of the book. So now you're kind of caught up to speed as to the situation that they're in now. And this is what Jocko's saying. He goes, even my initial reaction was, hell no! Exclamation point. It just wasn't worth the risk. Why would I go into combat without every possible advantage, much less a self-inflicted distinct disadvantage, right? I didn't believe that this mission made sense. I didn't believe it was smart. I didn't believe it would be successful. To imagine a firefight alongside Iraqi soldiers with such inferior training and questionable loyalty seemed outrageous, perhaps even suicidal. But as Task Unit Bruiser's commander, I knew my actions and my mindset carried great weight among my troops. These were my orders, and for me to lead, I had to believe. So I kept my doubts to myself, and I asked the simple question, why? Why would the U.S. military leadership on the ground in Iraq and back in America, from Baghdad to the Pentagon to the White House, task Navy SEALs and other special operations and U.S. Army and Marine Corps units with such a high-risk mission? I had seen how difficult combat could be with the best people by my side. Why make it harder? I knew that I had to adjust my perspective, hence the name of the show, to mentally step back from my immediate fight just outside the wire and think about the question from a strategic level, as if I were the one of those generals in Baghdad or back at the Pentagon. Sure, they were far from the front lines, but certainly they had the same goal we did, to win. That led to another question. What was winning? It certainly wasn't winning in the traditional military sense of the word. There wouldn't be no surrender from the enemy we fought against. There would be no peace treaty signed. Winning here meant only that Iraq would become a relatively secure and stable country. So I asked myself, how can we prepare the Iraqi soldier to handle security in their own country? They needed to start somewhere. And if there wasn't time to train Iraqi soldiers off the battlefield in a secure environment on base, then they would have to learn by doing, through OJT or on-the-job training. If the Iraqis never reached a level of skill at which they could defend their country from terrorist insurgents, then who would defend it? The answer was all too clear. Us, the U.S. military. We would be stuck here securing their country for them for generations. The disparity between the capability of the poorly trained, ill-equipped, and unmotivated Iraqi soldiers and that of the determined, well-equipped, and highly effective insurgent fighters they were up against was gigantic. Virtually every time an American outpost in Ramadi was handed over to the control of Iraqi soldiers, insurgents attacked and overran their position, killing dozens of Iraqi troops and sometimes the U.S. Marine or Army advisor assigned to them. The Iraqi soldiers were no match for the insurgents. It would take generations of training to get the Iraqi soldiers to the level needed to overcome and defeat such an aggressive enemy. Even then, such lackluster soldiers would likely never be capable of fighting and defending a serious adversary. For those of us on the front lines in this conflict, it was clear that there were many senior U.S. military officers who, far removed from the direct interaction with Iraqi soldiers, did not understand the Iraqi army's true lack of capability. They were simply terrible, and no amount of training would make them excellent soldiers. But perhaps we could make them good enough. And really that was it, right? So he's the commander of Task Unit Bruiser. He's been given these orders. And he knows that if he can't first believe in these orders himself, there's absolutely no way he'd be able to communicate to his guys these orders and have them believe and then go out and actually execute, right? So he pulled his guys together, right? Because he had to now basically break the news to his men that, oh, by the way, gents, we're on the ground. We're about ready to hit the ground running outside the wire. Go get us some. But one little caveat, we got to take these Jundies with us, which is the term that the Iraqi soldiers used for themselves. So he basically pulls his guys together and he says, well, let me ask you. So he basically tells his guys that he's going to go out there. He goes, all right, fellas, I said, You've heard the rumors. Every operation we conduct will include Iraqi soldiers. There were mutterings of obscenities and loud exhales of disgust. I repeated, quote, every mission we undertake, we will fight alongside Jundis. The room cut loose, this time with louder disagreement and curses. The consensus from the SEALs, the frontline troops who would execute our mission, was clear. This is garbage. I cut to not so subtle protest short. I understand the battlefield here in Ramadi is dangerous. It's difficult. Why make it even harder by forcing us to fight alongside Iraqi soldiers? Damn right, nodded much of the room in agreement, and he said, quote, well, let me ask you something, I continued. If the Iraqi military can't get to the point where they can handle security in their own country, who is going to do it? The room fell silent. I drove the point home by restating the question. I say again, if the Iraqi military can't handle the security in its country, who's going to do it? I had their attention, and they knew the answer. But to ensure everyone clearly understand the strategic importance of why we were being directed to do this, I made it perfectly clear. If Iraqi soldiers can't do it, there is only one group that will, us. If we don't get these guys up to speed, we will have this mission next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. The U.S. military will be stuck here for generations. It will be up to your sons and your sons' sons to secure Iraq. Damn, son.
Yeah. I mean, so let's, our listeners, especially the ones that aren't military, haven't been to Iraq, don't really know Iraq, haven't been to Iraq, but why Ramadi? Like, where the fuck is Ramadi? Right? Like, people don't. So you have, you know, I mean, Iraq's a pretty big freaking country.
Yeah.
And you've got Baghdad, obviously. Everyone's heard of Baghdad. It doesn't mean they can point to it on a map other than it saying Baghdad. Right? But, you know, there's really like what? I'd say three sectors of Iraq. You've got the northern part, the southern part, and then like kind of like the western part, which borders on Syria, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, right? Kind of like the Wild West.
Yeah.
Right? A little bit. And Ramadi is kind of like the gateway to that western side. So you've got, I mean, it's at the center of, or it's not the center, but what did they call it? The Sunni Triangle?
Yeah, the triangle. Yep.
So the Sunni Triangle, and it's right on the Euphrates. So it's kind of like the gateway. It's the last big city, which I think now the population is close to 400,000 people. So wrap that in your minds, folks. 400,000, 300 and change, I think. But that's a big city. And in 2003, when we invaded, and then subsequently over the next few years, that was like, I mean, it's on the Euphrates. It's also on the main highway that runs east to west. Is that one? Well, who knows? We named it whatever the hell we wanted, I guess.
Yeah.
And it is about 60 miles from Baghdad, I think. 60 west, something like that. About 60. And its next closest big city is Fallujah, which a lot of people have heard of, which is smack dab in the middle of between Baghdad and Ramadi is Fallujah. So just trying to give everybody a little geography. So, and it's right on the Euphrates. It's it really is like the gateway to, I mean, it's on the way to, out of Baghdad, it's on the way to Haditha, to the big dam there. And, you know, there's some different stuff. It's a very, and then in 2011, after we withdrew, that was one of the first places that ISIL, whatever you want to call them, wanted to take.
Yeah, and it's so to kind of put. I was there during that time in Baghdad, and we talked about it before on the show. Very much like when I was there, we were operating out of a FOB, a forward operating base, right? So we would have an area within Baghdad that we would pull back to, and that's where we slept and ate, and that's where aid stations were, and helicopter pads, and all that fun stuff, right? And then we would go outside of the forward operating base into the city proper and conduct our missions. Well, so think about it at a larger scale. The bad guys were doing very much the same thing, but instead of having a FOB inside Baghdad, they would actually stage outside of Baghdad in Ramadi and Fallujah. So that's where they would actually group together. They would make plans. That's actually where a lot of the VBIEDs, or vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, simply known as car bombs, were assembled and built. A lot of IED factories were in those areas. So they would build all that stuff and train and do whatever they had to do in Ramadi and Fallujah, and then they would move into Baghdad with those car bombs and with those IEDs and with those attacks, and attack, in Baghdad. So they were using a lot of the area surrounding Baghdad as kind of a staging ground. And that's why the insurgency was so thick in those areas, because, before we started to go into those areas and clear them, those were largely, for the most part, untouched by U.S. coalition forces. And so they were breeding ground for the bad guys. And, of course, a lot of the bad guys were from Syria, from Iran, from other places outside of Iraq.
Well, and it's part of the reason it's called the Sunni Triangle is that was like Ramadi was kind of like the epicenter of Saddam's Ba'ath Party. I mean, a lot of high-ranking generals, political figures, that's where they came from. Right. So they already had an opposition force there, like set up. Bottom line. Yeah. And it's I think if you look at the history of the city, it's more of it was more of a secular, even though it was ripe to be the bed of the insurgency, I guess you could say. So
yeah, and there's so much going on because you don't really have a defined government. You don't have laws that are being enforced. You don't have an established police force. You don't have an established military. You basically have anarchy, bro. You've got chaos and anarchy. You've seen the movie The Purge, where people just kind of cruise around and it's seriously like it was The Purge. Not even kidding.
Yep.
And so yes, you have your insurgencies and you've got the conflict between coalition forces and the insurgents, but you also had
all them fighting each other.
You had Shiites and you had Sunnis, which is the two. Well, you had the Kurds in the north, and you got Shiites and Sunnis, and none of those three groups really got along with each other.
And then on top of that, you have the tribal.
The tribal
like the Anbar tribes, and you've got all these different tribal.
Yeah.
And frankly, warlords.
Yep. That
control little areas of their little fiefdoms.
Yeah.
So I'd like to call them
inside each of those groups, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a lot of people, when I explain this to them, it's very similar to, because a lot of people at least understand the concept of the mafia, right? So you had like the mafia is like kind of like the big overarching group, but then within the mafia you had families, right? And there was a lot of conflict and infighting amongst the families, and then the head of each family is called the Don or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, but within each family, there's jockeying for position. So within the family, you got people that are trying to obtain the position of the Don, and so it's very similar like that in Iraq. So we're out on patrol, and there's gunfight and there's firefights going on, and it's not always between us and the bad guys, us and the insurgents. Sometimes we end up rolling into a firefight that happens, and it's between
rival gangs, basically.
Right, exactly. And so we don't know because everyone looks the same, and we're like, are they shooting at us? So we just return fire, and we have no idea. It's very convoluted and confusing.
That's one of the things that Jocko brings up as an advantage that they found. There was an advantage that one of the big advantages that they found with the local Iraqi forces is that they could tell the difference.
Right.
Whereas then we could not. Like, we would look at a group of, demonstrators or a group of people just milling around the market, right?
Yeah.
I mean, literally, there's like giant markets there, right?
Yeah.
And all these bazaars. And a lot of times they, everyone had to get their food somewhere. Mm-hmm. So I just remember this from my deployments and stuff too. It's just a different thing. It's like a giant farmer's market. That's the way that I describe it. Every day. Or at least, 2 or 3 days a week. So, you have foreign fighters milling around within or just the people milling around, your enemy milling around within the populace. And a lot of these Iraqi soldiers could tell the difference.
Yep.
There's little subtleties that we would never see, like the way that they wore their headwear, or the way that they, what they actually dressed in, and we'd be like, it's just the shirt. No, not exactly, or whatever. So that was kind of cool out of this book where he brings that up.
So here's a quick story from my time in Iraq. So, talking about these farmers markets, right? So you're right. You cruise down the road, and there's literally like, you got people out there that are drying tomatoes or drying peppers,
and just stalls,
yeah.
or like like little tents and stalls of just all kinds of shit. I mean, pretty fucking amazing, actually. Yeah. Like the smells and the stuff. You were like, holy shit! Heaven forbid you go on like a President's Patrol and you're fucking hungry. You're like fucked, and then you look down and you're like, I got this MRE I can eat.
So you got
whatever.
You got dates, you got freshly baked bread, and then all of a sudden you got like, a sheep herder stand where they got like 50 sheep, and they'll like literally slit their throat right there, hook their back legs up on hooks, and skin them and cut chunks of meat off of them and grill them right there on the spot.
Talk about fresh, right?
Oh, fresh as could be, man. And so we let those markets exist because it was it's part of their economy. It's like you said, you don't go to a local Shaw's, right? Or a Market Basket or
there's no Wegmans. There's no Wegmans. There's no Price Chopper or Winn-Dixie or name any, there's
Albertsons.
None of that shit.
Yeah. HEB. There's
some
none
fucking
of that.
Trader Joe's. Literally, right. It's Trader fucking Hamal.
Yeah.
Right.
So we let it happen because it's part of that's how they get their food. It's part of the culture. It is what it is. So that's part of what we were there to defend and to protect was their way of life, and they had to live and survive somehow. And then, but in good fashion, insurgents always look for the weak points, opportunities, and this is an unfortunate story, but there was a stand, one of amongst many of these stations or stands along the road, there was a watermelon stand, and it looked very similar to what everyone else was, just on the side of the road selling their shit, right? And they had this, and it was a kind of a neat little, like an A-frame kind of a stand. So you picture like an A-frame shelved structure. So now you've propped these watermelons on different levels of these shelves on this A-frame. So you got, maybe 4 or 5 layers of watermelons high, and the highest watermelon off the ground, or the top shelf, probably put the watermelon around 3-4 feet ish, and and there was some people there, obviously selling these watermelons. Well, directly behind, it was either in the watermelon or directly behind the watermelon, was a ball-bearing IED. And they basically waited for a coalition force convoy to drive by. And unfortunately, it was along our route, our MSR, our main supply route, that we were tasked with protecting. But we didn't always control other elements that rode through our AO. We were supposed to get notified of anyone rolling through our AO so we could kind of help escort them through and keep them away from, the points that we knew were kind of sketch. But it was a Marine Reserve, excuse me, a Marine Reserve element that came through. And as you know, Marines aren't as equipped as the Army conventional forces. So, their equipment wasn't as good, and their vehicles weren't, as up armored, and not only that, but it was a Marine Reserve, so it wasn't even active Marine. So they probably even had less of like the shit that everyone else had. And the lead vehicle of their 2-truck convoy, it was hot. It was so hot that day, and there was no AC in these vehicles, of course. And the TC, the truck commander, the guy that sat in the passenger seat next to the driver, he had his door propped open. So they were cruising down the road, and he had his foot pushing on the door to keep the door open to let some air in because it was just so hot. Well, the bad guys, as the Humvee drove by, the bad guy detonated the ball-bearing IED that was in the watermelon or behind the watermelon stand, about 3.5, 4 feet high, and the whole group of ball bearings just blew into the door of that Humvee. And of course, the Humvee wasn't up armored, but the doors of the Humvee were up armored, so the ball bearings would enter the vehicle and literally just ricochet off of the steel doors on the inside. And it killed the TC, killed the driver, hit the gunner. And the gunner was actually standing on a blue cooler to prop him up inside the turret. And the
of course he was.
Yeah, came through and hit his legs. And there was, of course, because the rest of his crew was, dead or seriously wounded, there was no one there to quickly render aid and put some tourniquets on his legs, and the gunner ended up dying as well. So there was 4 people in the truck, a driver, TC, gunner, and then a JAFO, or a guy sitting behind the driver. And he was the only guy that lived. He had sustained injuries, but we lost 3 Marines in that one blast. And we quickly rolled up on scene right as they were being evacuated by another element, and we secured the Humvees. And it was early on in our deployment, and they ended up, some local guy was out there with a camera taking pictures, and we were trying to shoo him away. Well, little did I know, that guy that took pictures of us securing that Humvee and evacuating the casualties was like some type of a reporter, and ended up selling the images and the story to some outlet, and those pictures ended up making their way on the front page of Yahoo at the time. And this is 2005, and so Yahoo was much of a bigger deal then than it is now. And my wife used Yahoo for emails and other things as kind of her, main browser. And so here she is back at home, and before I even have a chance to call her, she goes on the computer to check email and sees all these pictures on Yahoo of me standing next to this blown-up Humvee with casualties and all this stuff going on in the background. And I had no idea about this. And of course, I'm trying to not lie, but I'm trying to curb what's going on over there a little bit. I'm not sharing with her all the gory details because, Jesus, it's hard enough for me to be over there for a year and for her to be back home with no control over any of it, right? I just couldn't imagine being in her shoes, and any spouse that's listening to this right now that has service members deployed, God bless you, because I don't know how you do it. I don't know how my wife and my kids did it. But anyway, I ended up giving her a call. I don't even think it was the same day. It was maybe a couple days later. I gave her a call, and she was panicked, freaked out. She goes, "What happened?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "What? Oh my God, what happened?" And I'm just like, "Nothing. We're good. What do you mean?" And then she proceeds to tell me about these pictures of me standing next to a Humvee with, look like dead guys kind of hanging out of the truck. I'm just like, and it connected the dots. She ended up sending me the pictures or a screenshot of the Yahoo page. And sure enough, there it was, and I knew exactly what it was, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, that." And she goes, "What do you mean, oh, yeah, that? You're not going to tell me what this is about?" And so I ended up telling her and kind of sharing the story, and that's a hard conversation. You don't want to spend, and back in 2005, it's not like everyone had access to internet or there was unlimited phone calls. There was literally a phone booth, 3 phones, and you waited in line for hours to make a 15-minute phone call. I mean, that was my reality, right? And I didn't want to waste my time, defending what I'm doing over there and what I'm basically not in control of. But it was a tough thing, man, and just a story about kind of the realities that were. And another quick story here, going back to these Jundis, or these Iraqi soldiers that were being trained to quote unquote kind of take over the security of Iraq at the time. One of our bases over there actually had a contingent of Iraqi soldiers that would live in a section of the FOB in their own barracks, and they were there to kind of be trained by some U.S. forces, and were taking out on patrols to kind of give them a little bit of experience. Well, a couple stories came out of this one. So one day, these mortars kept coming into the FOB, and the mortars started getting more and more accurate. And the rounds started to walk onto key targets within the FOB, like the aid station, the chow hall, and the mortar pool, where there was a lot of people that were kind of out in the elements and exposed. And every other day or so, these rounds would come in, and they would just get closer and closer and closer to these strategic targets within the FOB. And we didn't at the time, we didn't know, God, these guys are just getting lucky. And how are they able to adjust? It's called adjusting fire, because I'm a forward observer artillery guy. So I picked up on this really quick. I'm like, wait a minute, they're adjusting fire. How are they doing that? In order to adjust fire, you've got to know where the rounds landed, and you got to know where your target is in order to adjust fire. And in order for the bad guys to adjust fire, they would need to have eyes on the ground inside the FOB to know where the rounds landed, or where the previous rounds landed, and they'd have to know where the strategic targets were inside the FOB. So that only tells you one thing: that there's somebody inside the FOB that is basically scouting out for the bad guys, right? And it turned out, make a long story short, it turned out that some of these Jundis that were living inside the FOB, that were being trained as, Iraqi Civil Defense Corps, ICDC at the time. A couple of them were wolves in sheep clothing. They were bad guys that were posing as Iraqi forces. And somebody ended up observing one of these guys pacing off. So he was making, when you pace something off, the gait, your step is a little awkward. It's not like you're actually normally walking. You're pacing, right? So your feet are, when you're walking or you're pacing something out, it almost looks like you're kind of stiff-legged. And so somebody observed one of these guys kind of pacing out from where a round landed in the direction of these strategic targets. And we ended up apprehending him and, detaining him, and he went off to wherever they sent him at the time, which was probably Abu Ghraib.
Ghraib.
Yeah, which is where, when I was there, when that whole conspiracy went down with
Christ.
Abu Ghraib. Oh, yeah. It was all while I was there. And so we had to hear about that while we were there. So we're like, oh, my God. So that's a whole other thing. So anyway,
cluster.
Oh, God. So you had these bad guys inside the FOB posing as these Jundis, right? And feeding information back. And it turns out we ended up capturing the mortar team a little while later, and it turned out that there's a couple members of the mortar team that were cousins of the guy that was caught pacing these rounds out inside the FOB.
Well, and let's be honest, too. It doesn't mean, and this even exacerbates the whole problem, is that these guys, the bad guys, literally live within the populace. Yep. So one of the issues you have too is what we call insider threats, right? So let's just say you've got a guy, let's say he's like a sergeant or a lieutenant even in the Iraqi army. And these insurgents decide to kidnap his daughter.
Right.
And say, if you don't do what we want you to do, we're going to kill your daughter.
Yep.
I mean, that happened all the time too.
Oh, absolutely.
So it wasn't just that they were bad guys. They were just in a bad fucking place. So, and it doesn't mean, so I don't want folks to get the impression that they were all bad people and that they were all shitbags.
Yep.
And that they want to raise their families just like you and I. Mm-hmm. So let's not paint it all in a shitty life, in a shitty light that they were all, their cousins were all fucking terrorists. It's just not like that. Actually, that was the exception.
It was the exception, but because that variable existed, it made it very difficult.
Hell yeah.
To trust.
Awfully
right?
hard.
Because now you're going out with these guys on patrol, and you've got them with loaded weapons standing behind you, stacked on a wall, right?
It's just like any instance that we talk about this all the time, that you can be the best guy in the world, right? And you do everything right. You do everything right for 10 years. Or let's say you've worked in a place for 10 years, right?
Yep.
9 years. And that 10th year, you have a shitty year.
Yeah, right.
All those other 9 years, they don't fucking matter. They're gone. It's so easy to lose a reputation and so easy to lose trust and everything just by because unfortunately the dark is definitely stronger than the light in a lot of instances, and it just takes longer to get positive feedback than it does to get negative.
Right.
It's so simple, and we're wired that way, unfortunately, as humans. A lot of people, that's work. You and I know that. We talk about it. It's so easy to focus on the negative, and it's so easy to say these Jundies, they all suck. Fuck them.
Yeah, right. It is easy to say
Fuck it. They all, because you don't want to put in the effort to actually either get to know them or get to understand why they do what they do or how they are like they are, because that's work, man.
Yep.
So it's, and that's what Jocko really is saying here is, you have to, as a leader, you have to look at all of it and you've got to buy in.
Yeah.
That's it, man. You've got to fucking believe.
Here's another quick story about Jundies, and then I'll get into the principle, and then we'll turn it over to you to do chapter 4. So we were tasked, we were told that, now we didn't always go out with the Iraqi guys. We were mostly contained within our own element, but on occasion we were asked to swing by the other FOB and pick up a contingent of Iraqi forces and bring them out on patrol with us as a way to kind of help get them more experience. And of course we were very much like Jocko. We're like, this is bullshit. We don't do this. But we're like, okay, whatever. We're gonna do what we're gonna do. So we pull into this FOB. We swing over to the barracks area where the Iraqi forces are, and we're in Humvees, and they have like the white Toyota pickups.
Yeah, baby.
That they were using.
You gotta love the fucking white Toyota pickup.
Oh yeah, and they had like a weapon mounted in the back to kind of as a crew serve weapon type of thing. But the vehicle's
one of those weird Russian cruisers.
Yeah, yes. And they definitely were not up armored, and they would fit like just a shit ton of guys in the back of these little pickup trucks. But anyway, so there must have been, 3 or 4 trucks full with these guys. And we roll out on patrol, and we're outside the wire. We're doing a couple of loops on the route, and we stop a couple times. Usually we stop and kind of go into like a security perimeter, like a halting position to observe, and then we'll pick up and move, and we just do that, right, for our night patrols. And, of course, we got night vision goggles, and we've got LRAS, and we've got some other really fancy night optics that we use. These guys didn't have shit, so they were probably like, why are we out here in the middle of the dark? We can't see nothing. I think they were just waiting for shit to pop off so they could fire weapons. Well, one of the commanders, I think he was either a lieutenant or a captain of the Iraqi troops, he was drunk off his ass. And we didn't know that at the time we rolled out. He was so drunk, he fell out of the back of the truck and was wandering around in the street. He was hooting and hollering and carrying on, and we're like, what is going, like, we're trying to kind of be relatively quiet. We don't have any lights on or anything like that. And, like, every Iraqi guy is out there smoking a cigarette. Right? We're like, no light discipline whatsoever. We're like, oh my God, this is just awful. So we ended up going back and like we told the officer that was drunk to get back in the truck. And he was yelling and screaming at I mean, drunk. Not like tipsy, but like shit-faced, this guy was. And I made the decision, I'm like, fuck this. We can't continue this mission with this guy like this. So I'm like, let's go. We're taking his ass back to the fob where he came from, and we're dropping his ass off and coming back out here with these guys, or just dropping everyone off and coming back by ourselves. Either way, this guy wasn't coming back out with us. It was hard enough to control a sober Iraqi Jundi, but a drunk officer, not happening. And so we ended up rolling back, and we ended up going back to where the barracks was, where the command and control center was. And basically, we had an interpreter with us to kind of help translate a little bit. And I told the interpreter, I was like, tell them that this guy here, he's not going with us. He's drunk. We can't take him with us. And man, and all of a sudden, his guys started to rally around him because they didn't want to go outside the wire without their leader, even though his leader was completely shit-faced and was in desperate need of a 12-step program. They wanted their leader, and they were they were in uproar, and things escalated completely out of control. Next thing you know, one of the guys steps up and he locks and loads and points his AK-47 right at my chest. I had a magazine in my M4, but I didn't have a round chambered because we came through the fob. We didn't hit the clearing barrels. We just unloaded. We went away from condition 1 and we just removed the chambered round. But I quickly pulled the charging handle back, locked the round, and lifted and raised my M4 at him. So here I am. I've got a condition 1 M4 basically pointed at him, and he's got a condition 1 AK-47 pointed at me, and he's yelling and screaming at me, and I'm shitting my fucking pants, bro. I'm like, this shit's going.
I don't mean to laugh at that shit.
Dude,
Holy
I'm
fuck.
like, this shit's going down right here in the middle of inside the fob.
Right.
By an Iraqi.
Talk about blue on blue.
I'm fucking dying. I mean, in my mind, I'm like, this is how I'm
right.
gonna fucking die.
This drunk motherfucker.
And all I can think of my guys that are kind of, some are still on the truck, some are standing outside next to me, and I'm like,
those dudes had been shitting their hands too. I mean, did your guys? It was like is this like OK Corral shit?
Yeah.
Like they pull their charging handles and fucking.
They were like freaking the fuck. And then they started yelling and screaming, and then the other guys started yelling and screaming. Next, it was a fucking standoff, bro. It was us and them yelling and screaming, and weapons are being pulled. And I'm like, this is one person. All it took, if one person pulled a trigger, even if it was pointed in the air or at the ground, if any one of us fires a shot, we're done.
Shit's going down.
We're all fucking smoked, right? And I still have my body armor on, but dude, that close of a range,
yeah.
I mean, as the AK-47 fires, it raises up, and I'm getting rounds.
You're catching it right in the throat.
Oh
right
my
in the
God,
face.
dude!
Yeah.
It's probably the scaredest I've ever been, bro. I'm like, Jesus Christ. I'm like, how are we gonna? And the interpreter, right? The interpreter is trying to hear our mad screams of fucking, get out, put it down, fucking. Oh, and then he didn't know what to do. He was just. I don't even know exactly what ended up happening. We raised such a commotion that all of a sudden more Jundis started pouring out of the barracks.
Oh, fuck.
And I'm like, oh my God, they're either going to kind of come help and defuse this,
wow.
or they're just going to make it worse, and we're just all going to fucking get smoked right here. Well, good thing is the guys that came out of the barracks were, one, they were unarmed, and two, they were able to realize that, this isn't going to be good no matter how it goes down, so let's just defuse the situation. So they ended up kind of pulling the guy. By this time, the guy that was in front of me, he dropped his AK-47, he grabbed the barrel of my M4, and he put it to his forehead. So now
because this motherfucker hated his life.
Yeah, now I'm standing there with my M4 pointed on his forehead. He's grabbed the barrel of the end of my weapon and has placed it against his forehead, and he's yelling some shit. And as he yells it, the interpreter is interpreting. So the guy's like, da 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 da, and the interpreter's like, shoot me, da 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 da, shoot me, da da da, shoot me. I look at the interpreter, I'm like, shut the fuck up, I get it. So just, oh my god,
it's like watching subtitles in a movie.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Long story, man. We ended up breaking contact from the Junties. We got in the truck, and I kind of looked at him. I was like, "You all are fucking staying here." We left.
Man,
we left.
So, what kind of blowback was there with this shit, though?
Well, I immediately went to my.
That's one of those ones where you go straight to your lieutenant, and you're like, "Hey, what the fuck? This just went down, but I want you to hear it from me before the shit gets fucking real."
Yeah, so I kind of gave a quick debrief on what went down, and then we just went out on the route and continued mission, man. But bro, that shit got real quick. So that's my story. Now these guys, same guys, right? Same types of guys, same time frame. These are the guys that Jocko's been asked to take out on mission, right? And maybe my story helped kind of pull that into perspective a little bit, right? So here's the principle, and I'll go through the principle, and then I'm turning it over to you, and we'll talk about ego. So the principle is, in order to convince and inspire others to follow and accomplish a mission, a leader must be a true believer, not just a believer, a true believer in the mission. Even when others doubt and question the amount of risk, asking, quote, is it worth it? The leader must believe in the greater cause. If a leader does not believe, he or she will not take the risks required to overcome the inevitable challenges necessary to win. And if they will not be able to convince others, especially the frontline troops who must execute the mission to do so, leaders must always operate with the understanding that they are part of something greater than themselves and their own personal interests. And I will tell you, especially after that night, I was not a true believer. Brother, I was not.
I was not believing shit.
We had to take guys out a few times after that, and let me tell you, we definitely we had a different posture. But here's the biggest takeaway, right? And here's what it is. You must ask why in order to know. You must know in order to believe, and you must believe in order to commit, and you must commit in order to succeed. So, and it has to happen in that order, and you need each of those elements. Why, know, believe, commit, and succeed. That's my takeaway for this chapter, believe.
Damn, son. Shoot me!
Jimmy! I'm like, oh my god, dude, I'm not even kidding about the shitting the pants thing. I literally had to go back to the
sharding. There was some sharding going on.
There was definitely some
skid marks. Like, those underwear are going in the trash.
Some fucking elevated heart rate going on in that little bit.
God damn, son.
Yeah.
Shit.
I don't think I've ever told you that story before.
No, you haven't. No. Yeah. Damn.
That was a scary one.
Yeah, that's fucked. That is people are like, are you fucking kidding me right now?
We got back to our fob after that patrol, and my guys and I were just kind of gathered around. And
that's one of those ones where you don't talk for a while.
We didn't have much to say to each other. We're just like damn, bro.
That shit just happened.
We're like, damn, bro, that happened.
That shit just happened. That was like some Hollywood shit.
Damn.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we've all had that on a patrol where you're like, that was some Hollywood shit. Like, I can't even believe that happened. I can't even believe that fucking happened.
Yeah.
Right? That's like out of a fucking nightmare.
Like, what the fuck what just happened?
Not only that, but it's like, we're not used to like dealing with drunk people on deployment. Like, not of people that are actually inside the fucking wire.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you have the errant guy that, you know, traded an MRE for a fucking six-pack.
Right.
Or some plum brandy or something, right?
Yeah.
You know, not that I've ever seen that happen. Wink, wink.
But
anyway.
They really loved their commander, man. They were not going out the wire without their... Yeah.
These motherfuckers can barely clean a weapon, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's funny because, like, the next time we rolled out of our fob, because there's like a little shack just before you roll outside the gate, and it was the interpreter shack. And that's where all the interpreters would hang out. So as you'd roll out, you just go into the shack and say, okay, who's up next? And they rotated, and you would just grab one of the interpreters and roll out, right? So I rolled in, like, the very next mission the next day, I rolled in and walked into the shack, and all the interpreters are in there. There must have been 3 or 4 of them. And I was like, okay. And it was the interpreter that was with us the night before that was, with us during that event. It was his turn to go.
He's like, fuck you, I'm not going.
And he's like, no, not with you. Nope. Nope.
Nope. As if it was your fault.
Yeah. He said some shit in Arabic to the other interpreter, and even though he could speak English, he knew I didn't speak Arabic, so he said some shit in Arabic, and one of the other interpreters like, oh, I guess I'm going with you.
He's like, this motherfucker's crazy. Yeah. Is what it was. This fucking crazy white boy I'm not going on patrol with this fucking crazy motherfucker.
I think he shit his pants too.
Probably, dude. Fuck.
Yeah.
Oh, man. All right. So, fun times. Fun fucking times. So, chapter 4. Mm-hmm. Check the ego.
Yeah.
Do it in my best Jocko voice. Check the ego. All right. So, Camp Corregidor, Ramadi, Iraq. Welcome to Ramadi. Enemy tracer rounds were zipping overhead as I raced up the stairs to the 3rd-story rooftop of our Tactical Operations Center, which is called the TOC building. Our camp was under attack, and I hadn't even had time to fasten my body armor when the shooting started. I grabbed my helmet and my rifle, slung my load-bearing equipment over my shoulders, and headed for the roof. SEALs were arriving by the dozen, some in flip-flops, some in flip-flops with only shorts and a t-shirt under their body armor, but helmets on and weapons at the ready. It's like that joke that we always talk about with flip-flops and a freaking PT belt.
Yep.
That's all I got on, and I'm fighting naked.
Oh, yeah.
Flip-flops and a PT belt. Just across the river in the darkness, enemy fighters had unleashed heavy volleys of machine gun fire on 2 separate U.S. outposts, and the American soldiers were returning fire with a vengeance. The bright glow of tracer fire was evident in both directions. Another group of enemy fighters had engaged our camp and just hammering our TOC building with gunfire from the far bank of the Euphrates River. But they hadn't counted on the response. Within minutes, every Navy SEAL and Task Force Bruiser and several of our non-SEAL support personnel were on the rooftop shooting back. Some SEALs had their M4 rifles, other M79 40mm grenade launchers, others with MK48 and MK46 belt-fed machine guns. We unleashed incredible volleys of fire back at the enemy fighters' muzzle flashes. I directed an M79 gunner to put some 40mm illumination rounds up so we could better identify our targets. Leaf was on the rooftop right next to me, shooting and directing fire. The SEAL just beside him unloaded two full 100-round belts through his machine gun, spewing. Jesus, that's a lot of freaking fire.
Oh, yeah.
Spewing spent shell casings across the rooftop that bounced with a metallic click. Everybody was shooting, having a hell of a time. There was much laughter as guys unloaded what was clearly a ridiculous amount of gunfire at the enemy. Soon the enemy fighters were either dead or retreating, and their attack subsided. The SEAL machine gunner looked around with a smile. "This is my 3rd deployment to Iraq," said the SEAL machine gunner excitedly, "and this is the first time I've ever fired my machine gun in combat." It was his first day on the ground in Ramadi. A few of us had been there for a week, including Bleve, some of the other key leaders, and me. But most of the Task Force Bruiser SEALs had just arrived that day. As much fun as we had shooting from the rooftop. This was a wake-up call for everyone in Task Force Unit Bruiser. This was Ramadi, a total war zone and the most violent place in Iraq. For those of us who had deployed to Iraq previously, it was a realization that this time would be different and a lot more dangerous. Welcome to Ramadi.
And I think everyone remembers the first moment that they're shot at and they realized, fuck, they're actually trying to kill me.
Yeah, there's nothing like that crack. Like, you know, I mean, and there's different types of cracks. Like you have the crack hierarchy.
Yeah.
And some of them have a zip and some of them have an actual, oh shit, the wall just fucking popped smoke next to me. Right? There's different cracks for how close it is. And
my first feeling, my first experience. So, and that's the ironic thing is you're getting on the plane to go to a hostile area, right? You know it's real because you're loading actual
mag. Yeah, see that's the different thing, man. When you're going into the shit, you don't have blank rounds. Like your shit's a lot heavier.
Yes. We were handed a box of ammo out in the motor pool in our fob when we first got there, and we were told to load up our magazine.
And you were like, "Wait, what?"
I remember just standing.
Where's my BFA, dude?
Yes, I remember standing next to my Humvee with my magazines over the hood of my truck, loading the ammo, just completely feeling just weird because before this. Anytime you had live ammo, you're at a range. Dude.
Oh, it's serious.
And it's highly controlled, and you've got range officers, and you've got, loudspeakers and blowhorns, and it is so controlled. Now I'm just being handed these live rounds, and I remember I ended up loading like 3 fucking magazines before somebody said, did you mix in any tracers? And I'm like, oh, no.
Right. No.
Because when have I ever had to load up a full 30-round magazine and space it with, every 5th round being a tracer? Never.
Right. Never.
Right?
Except for on deployment.
Yeah. I mean, when you go to the range and you're qualifying, the most you have is what?
Now, was Iraq your first real-world deployment?
Yeah.
Holy fuck. And you had been in how long already?
10 years.
Fuck.
Yeah. Yeah. I was a staff sergeant, and I was like,
you never did. Yeah. So you never did even like Bosnia or Macedonia or fucking anything.
I did NTC.
Fucking
I did JRTC a couple of times.
Barstow, California.
Yeah. I did NTC like 8 times.
Oh,
I did JRTC
shit.
a couple of times.
No. Yes.
Yeah.
That's not. No.
Yeah, man. So that was my first, this is getting real. This is kind of real shit, right?
Yeah. I remember that too. I remember the first time we got issued live rounds.
Did you remember to put your tracers in?
Yeah, because my team leader was like animate about it, right? But fuck, man. Yeah, I remember. I just remembered your asshole puckered a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
You're like shit. What the fuck?
My guys,
we're going into the dragon's fucking teeth here, man. Like
my guys are across from me on the other side of the truck on the Humvee on the hood, and they're loading up their shit, and I'm loading up my shit, and we're just kind of eyeballing each other. We're just kind of looking at each other like, damn, this is weird. This is like, this shit's getting real now, right? But so the first time, if that wasn't real enough, I mean, putting live rounds in magazines and feeling that weight, for the first time with a full combat load, different feeling. I mean, yeah, we had magazines with blank rounds, but those are much lighter.
But those are so like a full 30-round mag or 28-round mag or 29-round or whatever.
Yeah.
Fuck you. I'm putting 30 in this motherfucker.
Yeah.
I mean, that magazine is a lot heavier than you're used to.
And we had more than, and combat load is seven 30-round mags. We had like 16, 18 a person.
Right. Because we learned 7 ain't enough.
Nope. No, you can go through a combat
especially when you're fucking just firing, fucking freaking the fuck out.
By the time you even realize where the bad guys are, you're already like 3 mags in. You know what I'm saying?
So I'm gonna date myself. So the first time I ever got issued live ammo to go out on an actual mission, I was a 60 gunner.
Oh Jesus!
Yeah, and I carried an M60 Echo, which is the heavy barreled,
hell yeah,
forward grip. It's the Rambo gun, except for it's got it's a little shorter and it's got dual pistol grips, so you can bring it into your shoulder and actually use it, and a shortened heavy barrel.
Did you feel compelled to wear a headband?
No. A red fucking tied around my head? No.
Yeah.
But, yeah, pretty funny. So that was the first time I was ever issued combat, like, live rounds to go out on patrol.
Yeah.
Or to go out on mission, and it was surreal. Laying those rounds across the feed tray and slamming it home, and then you're just like, this shit's real as fuck. Mm-hmm. Now, the first time I ever did that in a vehicle was with a 50. You feel like the man. I'm sorry. Yeah. There ain't nothing like an M2 machine gun and you laying that freaking round off and just fucking pulling that. I did it with both hands just because, you get the charging handles on both sides and you're just like, that was fucking awesome. I felt like I was on the front of a battleship getting ready to with like quad 50s, from all the World War II movies. You're like, oh, that's how this feels.
Dude, those 50 cals will rock the fuck out of a Humvee.
So we'll get into that. Not in this episode, but like the story. Well, see, he didn't really tell this. He told part of the story in the book, but remember, because you listened to the podcast too, right?
Yeah, sure.
So the podcast with Jason Gardner, the last episode they did with Jason Gardner, where he's talking about that guy that was getting hit with the cruiser, like it's the Russian version of the 50,
right?
And I mean, see, people don't understand the power of that round because it can kill you just screaming by you. It doesn't even have to hit you. Right?
It's insane.
I mean, it doesn't even have to hit you. Just a concussion from the freaking round hitting near you will fucking kill your ass. So anyway, ego. So throughout 2005 and 2006, the vast and volatile Al-Anbar province was the most dangerous place in Iraq, accounting for the majority of U.S. casualties in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Of all the places in Anbar, the city of Ramadi was the most deadly. Located on the Euphrates River, Ramadi, with 400,000 residents, was the capital of Anbar province and the epicenter of the violent Sunni insurgency. It's funny, we just talked about that. Sorry, didn't realize that this was at the beginning of this. The city was strewn with rubble-piled buildings, burning hulks of twisted metal that had once been vehicles, and the walls marred with bullet holes. Giant bomb craters from IEDs dotted the main roads throughout town. Thousands of heavily armed Sunni insurgent fighters loyal to Al-Qaeda in Iraq controlled some two-thirds of the geographic area of the city. U.S. forces couldn't even begin to penetrate those areas without sustaining massive casualties. Al-Qaeda in Iraq claimed the city as the capital of their caliphate. So, yeah, man. Serious shit, right?
Yeah.
Part of the issue we get into here with ego is we're talking about a group of guys where their egos are gigantic. With the SEALs, right? Mm-hmm. If you think about it, most guys have this. You've got to be like, yep, that dude's ego's gigantic, right? Because they're the best of the best, right? They go through all this stuff. They go through all the training, this, that, and the other thing. They're also on top of that, and this is why they're just fed that we're the best, we're the best, we're the best.
Yeah. I mean, rightfully so. It's not trumped up charges.
Right.
It's like legit. They are the best.
And this is for me coming through the Marine Corps pipeline, and we're pumped. The Marine Corps is pumped with, other services just suck.
Yeah.
They just do. And you're pumped full of that shit. And part of that is, true. Just because you're trained to do less or more with less. Mm-hmm. So we know that, just like you had said earlier. They had less armored Humvees. They were standing on fucking coolers to do their shit. So it's like we're given the scraps of all the gear to do the thing. So,
but the difference is, instead of bitching about it, you guys are like fucking proud of that shit.
Exactly. So they have to do something to make it fucking okay with you and your brain, right? So but it's a different type of thing, right? Either way, it's Marines are just inherently cocky or have ego, right? But there's a difference, ego and cocky. So one of the best sayings out of this is, hold on, I have to get it. I want to say it right. So be confident, not cocky. That's like Jocko's thing, right?
Yeah.
Because ego is a big threat to top performance. And the most challenging ego to deal with is your own. Yeah. So be confident, not cocky. I mean, we all know that there's a big difference. And we don't really have a lot to talk about in this chapter because it's pretty self-explanatory. Mm-hmm. Hold on. Let me go back to the other part, though. In Task Unit Bruiser, we were confident and perhaps a little cocky. But I tried to temper that confidence by instilling a culture within our task unit to never be satisfied. And that's a key point, right? Mm-hmm. We pushed ourselves harder to continuously improve our performance. I reminded our troops that we couldn't take the enemy for granted. Now, that's a big... it's one of those side effects of ego, is complacency, of taking it for granted. Like, there's only so many times, and you do hear stories of this. I'm sure you have them, Eddie, that you're like, those fuckers can't shoot for shit. So it's like you hear the gunfire, but you don't really take it seriously because more times than not, they miss, right?
Yep. Until they don't.
Until they don't. So it's one of those things, like, you've got to have that thing, but that's a lot of times that's ego. It causes complacency. You're just like, So I reminded our troops that we couldn't take the enemy for granted, that we could never get complacent. With all that in mind, the boys of Task Unit Bruiser were fired up and eager to prove themselves as we deployed to Ramadi in the spring of 2006. Immediately upon arrival, we were humbled by that battle, right?
Yeah.
The violence of the battlefield and the incredible heroism of conventional U.S. soldiers and Marines of the 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 28th Infantry Division. Our SEALs had the benefit of much more advanced training and all the finest weapons, lasers, optics, and gadgetry that the enormous Special Operations Command budget could buy, but we were in awe of the soldiers and Marines who manned the outpost in enemy territory and were daily locked in a deadly struggle against the fierce and determined enemy. When the 1st Armored Division Ready 1st Brigade Combat Team arrived to replace 228 a month into our deployment, we developed a deep respect and admiration for those brothers in arms and were proud to serve alongside them. Every one of the conventional units we worked with had seen extensive combat. All had lost troops and suffered many more wounded. These soldiers and Marines were the real deal. They epitomized the term warrior. And that was one of the things that he talks about is instilling that in his guys, that you're no better than these fucking guys. You're no better than these conventional troops. And they have just as valiant a heart as you. They have, and they're doing it without all the training and gear. So what's your excuse?
Yeah.
It's part of the issue. I wish I had the hard copy with me because I'm trying to find that one.
So it basically what it comes down to in this chapter is how Jocko basically had his guys conform to the conventional military.
Well, instead of a lot of times you find guys, they'll let their hair grow out, they'll have the beards, they'll have the whatever. It's that quintessential special operations, operator, right? And he had his guys go the opposite way: shave, haircuts, wear the same uniform, wear everything, so you don't conform to the standard. Yeah,
what he said here is, from our earliest arrival, we established the precedent that the task unit bruiser, we would treat our Army and Marine brothers and sisters in arms with nothing but the highest professional respect and courtesy. SEAL units are sometimes known for their long hair and sloppy uniforms, but to conventional units, appearance was a measure of professionalism. In Task Unit Bruiser, I insisted that our uniforms would be squared away, our haircuts military regulation. We sought ways to work together with these units in support of one another. The goal was simple: secure and stabilize Ramadi. With this attitude of humility and mutual respect, we forged strong relationships with the Army and Marine battalions and companies that own these battle spaces in and around Ramadi. We took great risks to patrol deep into enemy territory to provide sniper support and protect friendly units in the streets. Those soldiers and Marines, in turn, consistently put their troops at risk to come help us with heavy fire support, Abrams tanks in particular, and M2 Bradley fighting vehicles as casualty evacuations when we needed it. So at the end of the day, he was like, okay, guys, we're badass. We know we are. But at the end of the day, we're going to need to work with these guys. Number one, we got to.
They're our lifeline.
Well, we got to work in their battle space, and when shit gets dicey, we need to call for them to come get our asses out.
Literally, who's the cavalry? It's them.
Exactly.
Right. So why would you want to treat these guys like assholes?
Right. And so, in order to do that, you have to break down the us versus them stigma, right? And the quickest way you can continue to develop that us versus them is to carry yourself like you are better, by growing out your beard, by wearing mixed match uniforms, by not conforming. Now could the SEAL team could Jocko have decided that Task Unit Bruiser was going to continue with that look and that approach? Absolutely, they could have continued to do that. Because at the end of the day, Jocko his boss wasn't the battalion commander of this element, right? Or the brigade commander of this element. He had his own chain of command. But Jocko knew that both forces would be better served if there was mutual respect. And in order to do that, all of the teams, the SEALs on the team, had to check their ego. Not just Jocko, but Jocko had to make sure, because it's one thing to be a leader and say, okay, guys, you're gonna wear a regulation uniform, you're gonna cut your hair, no beards, you're gonna take all the bullshit patches off that you've got on. It's one thing for him to say that, but then behind closed doors and when Jocko isn't around in the chow hall, you could have the Navy SEAL still poking fun at conventional military, standing in line to get food, right?
And that shit was unacceptable for him.
Right.
But
exactly.
He got his guys, and this harkens back to the past chapter in Bleve. He got his guys to believe that was the way, right?
Correct.
So same type of thing. So here's the basically the last part of this story that I want to read, and then we can talk about the the after part of it, right?
Yeah.
So we sent Task Unit Bruiser SEALs from Delta Platoon to live and work out of Camp Corregidor to train and combat advise Iraqi soldiers there and support the first of the 506th Band of Brothers, right? So it's the guys from I should say it's the historic unit, and these guys they're in it now, right? First of the 506 was just the unit from Band of Brothers.
Did you know I was in First 506?
Yes, I did.
in Korea.
Yes.
Charlie Company.
Yep. Not Echo. Charlie.
Nope, Charlie.
I know. Just kidding.
Yeah.
When the seal element...
Curry.
What the hell?
Alone. So, real quick story. So, whenever we get on the bus, because in order to get anywhere in Korea, you had to take a bus.
Yeah.
And it was not customary, but it was mandatory, and it's not like you had to make guys do it. We did it very proudly. But if you were a part of the first 506 and you got on the bus, the first thing you do, you would take the 2 or 3 steps up into the bus. Mm-hmm. You would turn and stand at the position of attention and face down the aisle of the bus, and you would yell, "Curry!" as loud as you could. And anyone on the bus that was also first of the 506 would reply in kind and yell, "Stands alone!" And that was just what we did. And there would be, members of other military force, other units or whatever on the bus. And they would be like, and so it was pretty funny because some of the guys got a little butthurt over the esprit de corps that the first 506 kind of developed over time. And so it would very often go like this. Somebody would get on the bus, stand in position of attention, and yell, "Curry!" And you'd have a few members on the bus that would reply in kind, "Stands alone." And then everyone else that was on the bus that got butthurt would reply, "Sleeps together." So it's,
right.
So it's like,
it's always that thing. It's always that shit. It's just,
alone,
hey,
sleeps together.
Jealousy.
Yes.
Jealousy is not a... That's pretty funny.
Sorry, funny story. I didn't mean to derail.
Oh, no, absolutely not, man. I'm used to that shit. This is why they call us cran eaters.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, you can cut me down. You can try.
Mm-hmm. You could try.
But the Marine Corps wins. Despite more relaxed grooming standards, SEALs typically enjoy elsewhere. The SEALs at Camp Corregidor cropped their hair short, shaved every day, and donned the same ACU combat uniform, camouflage, as their Army counterparts, right? Because the Navy has totally different uniforms. Well, at that time, I don't know if they did, right? But now they have the...
Yeah, I don't know. See, when I was there, 2004, 2005, we still had the tan desert camos.
Yeah. Now, did you have the ones with the pink or the... You know how it was like the weird tan and like brown and pink? That's how the uniform was.
Yeah, it wasn't
the chocolate chip. God, that's the worst camouflage ever.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, but like the Marines, they did have the DCUs or the digital
Yeah, it was like the digital ones, yes.
And technically that's the Navy too. But
right.
Anyway. So they were wearing ACUs. Camouflage as the Army counterparts. This overt sign of camaraderie endeared the SEALs to the soldiers of the 506. First of the 506. Now, it is a big deal. It really is. Mm-hmm. And you might not understand that if you weren't in situations like that. These soldiers had been in bloody fight for nearly 6 months, and the SEALs treated them with professionalism and respect. The Army returned that respect, and a bond formed quickly between the soldiers and the SEALs. There's actually a pretty good depiction of this in the American Sniper movie. It's not, regardless of your thoughts of the movie, they show the conventional forces and the SEALs working together pretty cool, pretty well, at least in a couple scenes. So if you want to get an idea of what it is, there it is. Our SEALs had been working out of Camp Corregidor for several weeks, carrying out dangerous operations with courage and skill and effectiveness when a new unit arrived. At first, the SEAL platoon commander at Camp Corregidor was concerned at the arrival of the new well-trained Iraqi unit and their American advisors. He called me on the field field expedient telephone and confided, this unit that just arrived likely has a much better capability than us. They have a lot of experience with Iraqi skill. What their Iraqi skill level is far and above our conventional Jundis. They have much better gear and good weapons, and their Iraqis even have a sniper capability. I replied, that's good. I'm glad there are Iraqi soldiers that have progressed that far. If you show them the ropes and get them familiar with the battle space, they will be a great asset. The SEAL platoon commander says, I don't know. I'm worried these guys will be better than us and take over our mission. Maybe I should just let them figure it out on their own, he said. I quickly realized that what was going on, as good as the platoon commander was, his ego was being threatened. In an environment like Ramadi, trying to figure things out for yourself could easily get you killed. This was no place for ego. Jocko says, no, don't even think about it. Listen, the enemy is outside the wire. Harkens back to your story. Mm-hmm. I told my SEAL platoon commander bluntly, our enemies were the insurgents lurking in the cities of Ramadi, not other coalition forces inside the wire. On the U.S. bases with us, we had to all work together for the same goal, defeating that insurgency. We couldn't let ego get in the way. I mean, how many times do we see this? Not just in the military, but in business.
Absolutely. I see it all the time in business.
I mean, crazy. You're like, dude, that's totally ego. Like, stop. Yeah. Like, what are you doing? Like, I had to pull a counterpart aside the other day, and I was like, why are you defending this so bad? And I'm like, this is because this is your baby. I understand. Mm-hmm. I'm like, this program or this group that you want to implement or that is implemented, it's not great. You know, this person came forward with another idea that's better. Let it ride, man. This is about veterans. This is about the veteran, not about you.
Right.
So it's one of those things. Like, sometimes don't be afraid to pull people's cards, man, and just be like, listen, you have to make them believe. That's why I believe in that's why these two chapters go hand in hand, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So I continued. This new advisor unit, this is Jocko talking. This new advisor unit, these are Americans and good Iraqis, possibly the best Iraqis. You do whatever you can to help these guys. If they outperform your team and take your mission, good. We will find you another one. Yeah, I'm sure there's no lack of missions at that point. Seriously. Our mission is to defeat the insurgency. We can't let our egos take precedence over doing what is the best to accomplish that. So again, it's about the overarching goal,
right,
of defeating the insurgency, not about you.
Yep.
Got it, boss? He says. This said the platoon commander, a smart and humble warrior. He quickly recognized his viewpoint was wrong and changed his attitude. It was immaterial which units did what or who conducted the most operations. What is the statement? I've said it a million times, and I say it constantly. I make Instagram posts out of it, Facebook posts, and I say it at work constantly. It's amazing how much you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, that kind of sums this all up.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day.
Because you know, it doesn't matter how the tire gets. It doesn't matter what tools you use as long as the tire gets changed, right? So often everybody wants to bloat about what they did and how they did it, tools that they used to do it, and you know, it's like, that's great, but I don't really give a shit about all that.
I mean, how many times do we hear it? Oh, I'm going to steal that.
Yeah,
and you know what? That's awesome. That's the whole point, right? You're supposed to learn from other. I mean, why make the mistakes that's ego too. Why am I going to make the same mistakes countlessly when if I learned from someone else's experience,
right,
I wouldn't have to make those mistakes.
Yeah.
But nope, I know how to do it better.
I recently ran into a situation at work where a colleague of mine needed to learn how to do something, but the only person that the only other person that knew how to do it, this person didn't like them, right? And so in order for my colleague to be successful, they would to have had to gone to the person that they didn't get along with or they didn't like so much and go in there and, number one, ask for help. Number two, admit that they didn't know themselves how to do it, and then ask them to teach them, right? And then the colleague was like, nah, I ain't doing that. And I'm like, why? Well, it was everything to do with ego. Mm-hmm. The person would rather not know how to do something and fail at a future task, then put the ego down for a minute and go in and be humble. And it's a hard thing, man, sometimes to do. I'm not saying that the person isn't justified in feeling that conflict, because, you know, we all deal with it at some level, at some point in our life, where we would much rather just go through the motions of not knowing or not doing something or not executing or not completing a mission before we have to go and, you know, get that information from somebody that we feel challenged by, or we feel that we don't get along with, or who has maybe potentially wronged us in the past, right?
Yep.
It's difficult, but you got to think it's about the mission first. If the mission is that I have to know how to do this in order to be successful at my job, in order to move this project along, then I not only should I have an obligation to the organization that I work for to put my ego down and go and do that, right? But I will tell you that if you've got the courage to do that, to actually, not to say it, you know, saying and doing are two different things, but if you actually have the courage to put your ego down and walk into that person's office, admit that, you know, hey, we haven't always gotten along, you know, I want to rebuild this relationship. We don't have to go out and drink beers after work.
Exactly.
But,
I mean,
right? But we have to at least be able to work professionally with one another in the office while we're here.
Uh-huh.
And I need to know how to do this, and I don't know how to do it. And I was told that you are the most knowledgeable in this area, and I could really learn a lot from you. Will you be willing to help me?
Yeah, man.
And I guarantee you, having the courage and the ability to go and do that, you will learn a lot about yourself. You will learn a lot about your ability to get things done. That's how relationships are made and built.
I mean,
that's
and this applies to life, not just,
Yeah.
I mean, to your family, to not just
Yeah.
work, not just, you know, the military. This applies across to everything. So ego clouds and disrupts everything. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
The planning process, the ability to take good advice, the ability to accept constructive criticism. It even stifles someone's sense of self-preservation. Often, the most difficult ego to deal with is your own. Everyone has an ego. Ego drives the most successful people in life, in the SEAL teams, in the military, in the business world. They want to win, to be the best. This is good, right? So that is good. But when ego clouds our judgment and prevents us from seeing the world as it is, so it's looking through it through a filter.
Right.
World as it is, then ego becomes destructive. When personal agendas become more important than the team and the overarching mission's success, performance suffers and failure ensues. Many of the disruptive issues that arise within any team can be attributed directly to a problem with ego. And implementing extreme ownership requires checking your ego and operating with a high degree of humility. Admitting mistakes, taking ownership, and developing a plan to overcome challenges are integral to any successful team. Ego can prevent a leader from conducting an honest, realistic assessment of his or her own performance and the performance of the team. Bottom line.
And that's sometimes hard. As a leader, it's hard sometimes to admit to your people that you don't know how to do something, right? Or it may be difficult to admit that your people know how to do something better than you do. But if you can embrace that, know that that's a reality. That's not that might happen. That's it will happen. If you're in leadership or a management position for any length of time, you're going to be faced with someday the reality that your people that work or report directly to you, in some instances, are more skilled or more knowledgeable or more capable of doing certain tasks than you are.
Yep.
What are you going to do about that? Some leaders can't handle that, and so they will try to stuff it, kind of squelch it, squander it, avoid it. But a smart leader that is able to check their ego will leverage it, will use it to build their people, to build relationships, to build that trust and confidence in that working relationship. It's not a detriment to your leadership. It actually, you will garner more respect by your people if you let your guard down, let your ego down, and admit that you don't know how to do something, and to learn and be willing to learn from your people. I'm telling you, man, it's a wondrous thing. But here's the thing: you got to be confident in your ability as a leader to do that.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Leaders that are not confident in their ability to lead are very protective of this. And but in order to get confident as a leader, you've got to enter into those moments of discomfort. That's where you learn and grow, and that's where you build confidence.
The abrasive stuff. Well, I mean, you really do. Humans, and we go back to this constantly, is humans learn two ways: mindless repetition and blunt force trauma.
Blunt force trauma, yep.
And ego is the cause of more blunt force trauma than I could ever. I mean, I've been smacked upside the head because of my ego when I was younger more times than I can count, you know? I mean, you can never think you're too good to fail.
Right.
Or that and this is from the book, and that you're never too good to fail, and your enemies are not capable, deadly, and eager to exploit your weaknesses. And that's weaknesses on the battlefield or weaknesses in the boardroom, right? Or
yep.
Even with child rearing with your children. Jesus, are you kidding me? They test you every single freaking second, and they just look for those weaknesses, right? Mm-hmm. And you must never get complacent. This is where controlling the ego is most important. That kind of sums it all up, man. I mean, apply these principles to life in general. Like I said, when you and I talk about this on our, not on the air, I always apply these principles because my biggest challenge is dealing with my children. So I always apply these things as basically the leader of my family. I mean, and my wife is here too, right? But it's I'm dealing with my shit, not her shit. Because again, I have to lead from the front, and that's what I've been doing, man. I take these principles and I totally apply them to my everyday life, not my leadership role at work or wherever,
Right.
And I'm telling you, shit works. It really does. It just does. It's amazing. Even in the 2 months that I've been instituting the principles within my family, it's like different, totally different, way better. So, and it's better hard for it.
Well, I mean, as a father, it's difficult because you're the leader, the man of the house, the leader of the house. When we make mistakes, sometimes it's difficult to look at our children and say, "I made a mistake."
Oh yeah, I mean, how many times do you hear, because I said so? Why do I need to do that? Right. Because I said so? That's the wrong fucking answer. That's ego. Right. That's not being a leader. That's not making people believe. Yeah. So I make my kids believe now. Like, this is why I'm doing it this way. And I explain, and God, it takes so much time. I'm not going to lie. I mean, it's exhausting. But at the end of the day, I don't fight. It's either put the effort in up front and make them buy in on the idea, or you deal with the punishments later. And that's, again, what is it? This is all about. One of the principles of this entire thing is discipline equals freedom. Oh my God, man, I have so much more time now. Right, because I'm not fighting everyone all the time.
Yeah. So here's a really, really quick story. I have an summer intern right now, and I'm working on putting together a contact list. So there's a company basically that we work with that's headquartered in Atlanta, and every other company around the United States and Canada uses the same company in Atlanta, right? And I reached out to my client representative of this company, and I was like, hey, I have to work with all of your people down there, but I don't know everyone's contact information. I don't have emails and phone numbers for everybody, and it makes it very difficult to reach out to these folks when I need them. And in order for me to get these contact informations, what I have to do is I got to go back to old emails that I've received. So I got to go find emails that I've received from these people in the past, and then sift through each email and look at each one of them in hopes that they have their contact information as part of their signature of their email. Which, by the way, folks, if you're listening to this and you don't have, when you send an email, if you don't have your signature, your contact information as part of your signature, you need to correct yourself ASAP, and not just having your contact information for emails that you send, but put your contact information in your signature for emails that you respond to or reply to as well. That's just some common, business courtesy, because a lot of times people need to get a hold of you, and they do what I do in most cases. They got to go back to old emails and find one from you, and hopefully your contact information is on your signature. But anyway, so that's how I've been finding contact information, and I'm like, this is just, it's inefficient, it's ineffective, it's time consuming. There's a better way. It's called Excel spreadsheet. Everyone's name, number, email address, all in one place. That's what we need to do. So I reached out to my client representative and was like, hey, do you guys have a one-page contact list for all your people? And she's like, well, let me go check. And she came back a few days later and she goes, nope, we don't have anything like that. And I'm like, well, that's unfortunate, because you probably should, because if I need this information, chances are there are other companies around the United States and Canada that are also probably looking for this information. So I said, can you put together just whatever you do have and send it over? So she did, and there was about 48 pieces of information missing: phone numbers, email addresses, etc. And I needed to reach out to contacts on this list and start collecting that data, that information. But I don't have time to do that. So I wanted my intern to do that. Now, the thing about internships is interns want to do work that's meaningful. No intern wants to work over the summer and do just mindless, numbing jobs. And unfortunately, those are some of the best jobs that we can offload to an intern are those types of repetitive, mind-numbing, worthless jobs that still need to get done, but may or may not be all that important. And so I wanted to offload this to him. But I knew that if he didn't understand the value in this work, if he didn't understand why, I was confident that he was going to do it. But I wasn't confident that he was going to do it very willingly or be really excited about this task. It seemed very administrative, lackluster, not exciting, right? It still needed to be done, but it wasn't exciting. And so I pulled him into my office and I was like, here's the deal, man. Here's the list of information that I have. Here's the pieces of information that are missing. I need you to reach out, and we have, you've got a month to do it. So it's not like you got to do it all one day. Pace yourself, whatever. But I need to get it done. I need you to reach out to these people. I need you to collect the missing information here. And I was like, but here, before I send you off to do this task, I need to explain to you how important this task is. I said, number one, right now, the soft costs alone in going and trying to find this information without having this one central point of contact information, it's taking a lot of time and effort. We're spending money that we could be spending on other things by doing other things, but we're spending and wasting time trying to find contact information. So number one, the work that you're doing here is going to save me and everyone else on my team a lot of time. And I was like, so that's a number one reason why what you would be accomplishing by doing this task. And I said, number two, once this is done, I'm going to provide it to my client representative, who's then going to disseminate it out to all the other organizations throughout the entire country and Canada, and they are now going to be able to have this information all in one place. So you're not only doing this for this team, but you're doing it for the entire organization across all of the United States and all of Canada. And you should see his eyes light up, man. He was just like, oh, really? And so he not only, I could have, I'm his boss. He's an intern. I could have just said, hey, go collect these missing pieces of information. You've got a month to do it, carry on. and he would have went and done it, but he wouldn't have seen the value, the purpose, the long-term value. Now he's working on it and he understands that it's meaningful. But as a manager, right? I'm a mid to upper level manager in the organization, and he's an intern. Did I have to explain myself to him? Absolutely not. Did Jocko have to explain himself down to the lowest member of his team? Absolutely not. He didn't have to, but he and I realized the value. Right, we should. And to do that, it takes a level of putting your ego aside. I have to check my ego and say, okay, I don't have to go down to the nitty-gritty and give this guy a reason why. But I know that if I did that, if I checked my ego even a little bit, and I brought myself to the level of, let me tell you why this work that I'm asking you to do is so important, to put meaning and value into the work that he's doing, it not only will give him that motivation, but he'll understand why, he'll know, he'll believe, he'll commit to it, and he'll be successful. That's it, man. That's it in a nutshell. Believing and checking the ego. Sometimes you got to check your ego in order for people to believe. Period. End of story. And it goes very much hand in hand. It happens at work, in relationships, in life, in family, in the military. If you're not in the military, there's a lot to be learned here. So if you don't already have the book, go pick it up. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. We've covered chapters 1 through 4 now. Next week we're covering, unless we get an interview, we're working on getting a guest or two on the show to talk about some stuff. Yep. And if we end up doing that, then we'll sprinkle that in between as well. But we'll just keep marching forward. I mean, typically we wouldn't use multiple episodes to cover a single book. You could, in a lot of cases, cover an entire book just in one episode, but I think there's just too many points worth talking about in each of these chapters that I don't think we'd be doing it justice if we try to cover this entire book in just 1 2-hour show.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
And that's why we're doing it this way.
Yeah. So if nothing changes in terms of our guests, I think we're going to do chapters 5 and 6 next week. Cover and Move and Simple. And I know they sound simple, but simple's not always easy.
Not always easy.
So anything you would like to add to close out
I think
today's show, sir?
It's good stuff.
All right, brother. Have yourself a happy, wonderful weekend. And
you as well.
And I'll look forward to our conversation next week.
Yes.
Cover and Move and Simple. It's very simple.
It's very simple, but it ain't easy.
Yeah, but it ain't easy. All right, man. So you can check us out on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram as well, right?
Yeah, we're everywhere.
So what's our Instagram handle? Do you know?
Well, let me verify. But I think it's just Change Your POV.
Yeah, we're at Change Your POV on Facebook. And you and I are both on LinkedIn as well, so you can check us out.
Yep, it's LinkedIn. Literally Change Your POV.
Change Your POV on Twitter.
And Change Your POV on Instagram.
There you go. So come hit us up. Let us know what you think of these chapters. And if you want to comment on them, just use hashtag Extreme Ownership, and we'll be able to hear about what you think and share your thoughts on air as we continue through this book. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
All right, brother. Talk it easy, man.
Take it easy.
All right. Peace.